Good Thursday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for June the 22nd. Today, we're reading together in Joshua chapter 22. Let me get the text up on the screen for us so we can read along together here in Joshua 22. We have just a couple of chapters left. We have 22 today, 23 tomorrow, 24 on Saturday, which means on Sunday, we will be getting into the book of the Judges, which is really one of my favorite reads just from a storytelling perspective, and I'll note a lot of that once we get into the text of the Judges. So be ready for that coming up on Sunday, but for the next 2 days after today, we'll be finishing up in Joshua. Let's go ahead and start reading here in Joshua chapter 22. The work of the conquest has been done for the most part, at least in the way that is described to us. Remember at the end of chapter 21, we see that the author notes that Yahweh had given all the land that he had promised to Israel's forefathers. He had given that to them, and he had kept up his end of the covenant that he would give them this land, and they simply needed to show covenant faithfulness to him and to follow him and to trust him and to keep his laws and ordinances. And they had done that. Everything seems to be going well here at this point. But as is so often is the case with the Israelites, dangers lurking right around the corner. So let's see how in today's text of Joshua 22, there was almost disaster very quickly after the western or the eastern tribes begin to go back to their own land. We'll see how there was a potential issue that thankfully ends up being resolved pretty smoothly here within this chapter of Joshua chapter 22. Let's get to reading here. Joshua 22, verse number 1, Joshua summoned the Reubenites, Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh and told them, "You have done everything Moses, Yahweh's servant, commanded you, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded you. You have not deserted your brothers, even once this whole time, but have carried out the requirement of the commands of Yahweh your God. Now that he has given your brothers rest, just as he promised them, return to your homes in your own land that Moses, Yahweh's servant, gave you across the Jordan. Only carefully obey the command and instruction that Moses, Yahweh's servant, gave you to love Yahweh your God and walk in all his ways, keeping his commands, and be loyal to him and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." Joshua blessed them and sent them on their way, and they went to their homes. Moses had given territory to half the tribe of Manasseh in Bashan, but Joshua had given territory to the other half with their brothers on the west side of the Jordan. And when Joshua sent them to their homes and blessed them, he said, "Return to your homes with great wealth, a huge number of cattle and silver, gold, bronze, iron, and a large quantity of clothing. Share the spoil of your enemies with your brothers." The Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites at Shiloh in the land of Canaan to return to their own land of Gilead, which they took possession of according to Yahweh's command through Moses. When they came to the region of the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh built a large, impressive altar there by the Jordan. Then the Israelites heard it, this would be the Western Israelites. They heard it and said, "Look, the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan at the region of the Jordan." Excuse me. On the Israelite side. And when the Israelites heard this, the entire Israelite community assembled at Shiloh to go to war against them. The Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, to the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead. They sent 10 leaders with him, one family leader for each tribe of Israel. All of them were heads of their ancestral families among the clans of Israel. They went to the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead and told them, "This is what Yahweh's entire community says. What is this treachery you have committed today against the God of Israel by turning away from Yahweh and building an altar for yourselves so that you are in rebellion against Yahweh today? Wasn't the iniquity at Peor, which brought a plague on Yahweh's community, enough for us? We have not cleansed ourselves from it even to this day. And now would you turn away from Yahweh? If you rebel against Yahweh today, tomorrow he will be angry with the entire community of Israel. But if the land you possess is defiled, cross over to the land Yahweh possesses, where Yahweh's tabernacle stands, and take possession of it among us. But don't rebel against Yahweh or against us by building for yourselves an altar other than the altar of Yahweh our God. Wasn't Achan, son of Zerah, unfaithful according to what was set apart for destruction, bringing wrath on the entire community of Israel? He was not the only one who perished because of his iniquity. Verse 21, the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh answered the heads of Israel of the Israelite clans, the mighty one, God, Yahweh, the mighty one, God, Yahweh, he knows. And may Israel also know. Do not spare us today if it was in rebellion or treachery against Yahweh, that we have built for ourselves an altar to turn away from him. May Yahweh himself hold us accountable if we intended to offer burnt offerings and grain offerings on it, or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it. We actually did this with a specific concern that in the future your descendants might say to our descendants, well, what relationship do you have with Yahweh, the God of Israel? For Yahweh has made the Jordan a border between us and you, descendants of Reuben and Gad. You have no share in Yahweh. So your descendants may cause our descendants to stop fearing Yahweh. Therefore we said, let's take action and build an altar for ourselves, but not for burnt offering or sacrifice. Instead, it is to be a witness between us and you, between the generations after us, so that we may carry out the worship of Yahweh in his presence with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowship offerings. Then in the future, your descendants will not be able to say to our descendants, you have no share in Yahweh. We thought that if they said this to us or to our generations in the future, we would reply, look at the replica of Yahweh's altar that our ancestors made, not for burnt offering or sacrifice, but as a witness between us and you. We would never, ever rebel against Yahweh or turn away from him today by building an altar for burnt offering, grain offering, and sacrifice other than the altar of Yahweh our God, which is in front of his tabernacle. When the priest Phinehas and the community leaders, the heads of Israel's clans who were with him, heard what the descendants of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh had to say, they were pleased. Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, said to the descendants of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, today we know that Yahweh is among us, because you have not committed this treachery against him. As a result, you have rescued the Israelites from Yahweh's power. Then the priest Phinehas, son of Eleazar, and the leaders returned from the Reubenites and Gadites in the land of Gilead to the Israelites in the land of Canaan, and brought back a report to them. The Israelites were pleased with the report, and they blessed God. They spoke no more about going to war against them to ravage the land where the Reubenites and Gadites lived. So the Reubenites and Gadites named the altar, it is a witness between us and Yahweh is God. Between us that Yahweh is God. All right, so that is the text of Joshua chapter 22. And again, they've gone through the conquest. They've been granted the great promises that Yahweh has made to them concerning this land. And now it's time to settle in and begin living well in this land. The first thing that's mentioned for us here in chapter 22 is the fact that, it's a reminder of the fact that not all the tribes of Israel are going to be living on the same side of the Jordan, that there is this portion of land that has been given, I'll move my Bible up here to see it a little better, that has been given to 2.5 tribes. If we remember going back to Numbers chapter 32, that really a lot of this comes from what took place in Numbers chapter 32, and it is when they had victory over some of the kings on the western side. Excuse me, there, got a little choked up. Whenever they had some victories in Numbers 32 against some of the enemies that were on the eastern side of the Jordan, that they saw that Reuben and Gad saw that the land would be good for their large number of livestock. It says in Numbers 32, verse number 1, that the Reubenites and Gadites had a very large number of livestock. And when they surveyed the lands of Jazer and Gilead, they saw that the region was a good one for livestock. So the Gadites and Reubenites came to Moses and Eleazar, and they basically said, hey, can we set up our tribes here on this eastern side of the Jordan? And you might recall that when they said this, Moses flipped out. He had a very, very strong response against this idea that they could stay in this place, because they said, no, you are rebelling against God. You don't believe that we can actually take the land for ourselves. You are rejecting him and his will. You are setting us up for disaster. And they say, no, that's not the case at all. In fact, we'll show you that we believe that we could take the land. So whenever it's time to cross over the Jordan and go on this conquest, we will be the first ones to go in front of you. And we will fight with our brothers, and that they're going to take the land on the western side of the Jordan. So we get back here to Numbers 22 then. So remember, Joshua 22. So if you're writing in your Bible, you might write here in Joshua 22 a reference to Numbers 32, and then go back to Numbers 32 right there, a reference to Joshua 22, because they are so perfectly connected to one another. But they said, we're going to go ahead and fight with you. And actually, going back to Joshua chapter 1 and verse number 12, we see that Joshua said to the Reubenites and Gadites and half tribe of Manasseh, remember what Moses, Yahweh's servant, commanded you when he said that Yahweh your God will give you rest and he will give you this land, but that they must stay over there and that you must come and assist in taking the land. So it is first stated in Numbers 32. It is restated in Joshua chapter 1 that this was the expectation. And now we get to Joshua 22, and we see that the expectation has been fulfilled, that they were with their brothers as they fought against the Canaanites. And as they went on this conquest, they did help them with that. And now they are being blessed to go back to the other side, to the eastern side of the Jordan River, and to live out their time there. But they are sent there with the reminder that even though you're going away from us, you must make sure that you continue to keep the covenant, just as we are here on this side of the Jordan. Only be careful, verse number 5 of Joshua 22. Only be careful to obey the command and instruction of Moses, Yahweh's servant, that he gave you, to love the Lord your God, to love Yahweh your God, to walk in all of his ways, keep his commands, and be loyal to him, and to serve him with all of your heart and all your soul. This is an echo, a very clear echo to the Shema of Deuteronomy chapter 6. So they go. They are released basically from their responsibility because they have fulfilled that responsibility. They've fulfilled the obligation. So now it's time for them to go and to live on the the eastern side of the Jordan. As they're going that way, we see really the crux of the issue in verse number 10. Now, when they came to the region of the Jordan and the land of Canaan, the Reubenites and Gadites and half tribe of Manasseh built a large, impressive altar there by the Jordan. So they built this really, really big altar, and just this on its surface causes a great deal of concern for the Israelites who are living on the western side of the Jordan, because in their minds, they're thinking that they are rebelling against Yahweh in setting up unauthorized worship to him. So to their credit, they don't just rise up in war immediately and go and attack the eastern tribes, but they send a delegation. They send Eleazar, they sent the 10 leaders who are with him, and they go and they discuss this. They investigate, and they say, hey, this is an issue that this is what Yahweh's entire community says. What is this treachery you have committed today by building an altar for yourselves in rebelling against Yahweh? Don't you remember that we had this big issue at Baal Peor, where many of our brothers died because of rebellion? Don't you remember what Achan did whenever he didn't deal properly with the possessions that were found in Jericho? Don't you remember that rebellion against God comes with very, very severe consequences? Don't you remember that? Why would you do this certain thing? Why would you rebel against Yahweh in this way? Why would you bring this iniquity upon all of us by building this altar? So the response then, from the Reubenites and Gadites, it seems to be a reasonable response. Their issue is, hey, we're living over here. Number one, their problem, they say that, listen, we're not living in rebellion or treachery. If we are, then may God judge us. May you judge us, because that's what we deserve. But that's not what we're doing here. The issue here is the fact that we are concerned that in the future there's going to be a schism basically between the people of our side and the people on your side. Give me just 1 second. All right, there we go. There's going to be a schism between the people on your side and the people on our side, and they're going to say, hey, those people over there on the other side of the Jordan, they're not really connected to us. We've got this huge barrier between us, this Jordan River, and they can't belong to us, and we can't belong to them. And so if they can't belong to us and we can't belong to them, then we can't share the same God, and they don't have a portion in the Lord. They don't fear him like we fear him. So the way to remedy that in the minds of the Reubenites, the Gadites, half tribe of Manasseh, is for them to build this altar, but not to build it as an actual means of worship. Deuteronomy chapter 12 talks about there is to be one central place of worship wherever Yahweh decides to put his name. Again, it originally is corresponding with where the tabernacle is. It seems at this point that Shiloh is the place for the tabernacle, because remember, that's where they gathered together. So it would have been inappropriate for them to build another place of worship aside from Shiloh. But they say that this is not actually an altar to be used for worship, but it's to be used as a witness to remind us that there is one God alone whom we are to worship. That's their explanation in verses 26 through 29, specifically verse 29. We would never rebel against Yahweh or turn away from him today by building an altar for burnt offering or grain offering or sacrifice other than the altar that Yahweh our God, or other than the altar of Yahweh our God, which is in front of his tabernacle. That's the only one we're going to offer sacrifices on. This is just one that is going to serve basically as a sign or as a symbol, specifically as a witness for us that we do belong to Yahweh and that we are his people and that he is our God. This is something that's going to stand for the generations coming after us, that there would not be this great divide. Now, again, I can understand this issue, but maybe they should have thought about that back in Numbers 32, right? Maybe instead of being so concerned with the prosperity of the land that they were in, that they should have been concerned with, hey, this Jordan River is going to very well could cause a schism between us and the rest of the tribes. But they cared about the land. They really liked the land. So now they're having to deal with this issue. And it is very well could have brought about an even greater issue for them. But whenever Phinehas and the rest of the leaders hear this, they're pleased. They're very happy. I'm sure there was a great sigh of relief on behalf of all those who are involved, knowing that thankfully war is not imminent, and then we're not going to have to go to war against our brothers at this time. Although, unfortunately, once we get to Judges, we're going to see that's something that actually happens on a number of occasions, which is very unfortunate, but it is a result of sin. And again, the principle here of we cannot allow for even just one part of the community to be engaged in sin, because that's going to bring consequences on the rest of us as a whole. So they rejoice today. We know that Yahweh is among us because you have not committed this treachery against him. As a result, you have rescued the Israelites from Yahweh's power. So there's no rebellion. We're all good. Things seem to be on the up and up. So they bless one another, they bless God, and they're able to go on their way. And so verse 34, the Reubenites, the Gadites name the altar. It is a witness between us that Yahweh is God. Or there's other various translations. It could also read that they name the altar witness, that the name itself is witness because it is between us, or because it shows that Yahweh is God. So again, the whole issue here is this altar being built for illegitimate worship? Is this a pagan place where pagan worship can be committed? And the answer to that is no. This simply stands as a sign for the eastern tribes to remind them of who their God is and that they belong to him and him alone. Now, one thing I'll take away from this as a good lesson for us is I appreciate the fact that instead of just rising up and immediately going and attacking the Reubenites and the Gadites and half tribe of Manasseh, they ask. They actually investigated. They sent an inquiry to determine whether or not their perception of the situation was correct or not. And that's just so important for us because we can make snap judgments. And if we don't investigate, sometimes we might find ourselves, we might not recognize that our perception of the situation isn't exactly in tune with the reality. So it's always important, whether we're talking about our actions or whether we're talking about our words, to do a lot more thinking than we do actual action. Like I spoke with the girls recently, make sure you think before you speak. In this instance, it was a good thing that they investigated before they acted. And that's just a good lesson for us to be patient in making determinations, be patient in the way we talk, be patient in what we do, because we might get out ahead of ourselves and end up making a mess out of something that a mess really wasn't necessary for. If you have any other questions about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. I appreciate you taking some time to read along with me today, and we'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading from Joshua 23, which is going to contain I believe it's going to have the famous, nope, that's going to be the next one. But 23 is Joshua's farewell address. So we'll talk about that and then look at chapter 24 on Saturday. Again, thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone. Take care and God bless.